Welcome to Mastery with Science, home to mad scientists, rogue entrepreneurs, and the coaches with the mostest, featuring JB and the Doctor. Join us in our lab where we mix the old recipes with new formulas and our secret sauce to create incomparable, next-level proven results for you. We call this Mastery with Science. So, slap on your gloves and put on your goggles because JB and the Doctor are in the lab.
It's alive!
Hey everybody, it's JB. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you to check out our show notes where you can find details on our Facebook community group, our YouTube channel, and our upcoming free webinar, Next Level Sales, the 3 must-know things that you need to level up your sales. Check it out, and now, on to the show. Hey, it's JB. Thanks for joining us again in our lab. I'm here with
the Doctor, also in the lab, chilling.
I'm just going to extend that awkward silence for a moment. It's all good.
Was that a throwback to last week's podcast episode when we talked about silence?
Oh, those pregnant pauses.
If you're wondering what we're talking about, you need to go download the last episode of our podcast.
Get it. If you aren't subscribed, you should be, and you definitely want to take a listen. It was a good one. We've got another real fun topic coming up today, don't we?
Super duper fun.
Any card players out there listening? Anybody ever play games of chance? Anybody ever go to the casinos or Vegas, maybe?
Any Kenny Rogers fans?
We're going to be talking a little bit about when to stay the course, when to gracefully bow out, walk away.
Or pivot.
The big P word. It's massive. It's huge. It's the P word. Pivot.
I'm glad you clarified pivot at the end of that statement.
Get your minds out of the gutter, people. We're talking about pivoting today. Knowing when to hold them and knowing when to throw them, right, Doc?
When to walk away and when to run.
Yeah, it's a tough one. This is actually a near and dear topic to me because I will say that I don't know how good I am at this. I'm stubborn. I'm like a stubborn son of a bitch, man. I really struggle to know when to tap out. And it's just not really part of my personality to walk away from stuff very easily.
I can confirm that's an accurate statement.
Yeah, and you can see it in like all aspects of my life. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. My wife all the time is like, you don't know when to just say you've had enough. And you know what? I think for me, that's a good trait, probably. It certainly makes me who I am. I mean, good or bad, it's who I am. I don't see it changing. But this is going to be a real fun topic to talk about today because I think we've got some real good conversations we can have, some real life stories we can throw at our listeners today, Doc. What about for you? How do you feel about this?
It's a tough one. It is that battle of keep going. Am I putting enough effort into it? Am I quitting too soon? Or is the writing on the wall and I just don't want to read it and need to make some changes? And it is an ever going battle. I don't think we're alone on this one.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes it's like fairly in your face and obvious whether or not you want to admit it. And other times it's not nearly so much. I mean, a lot of life is trying to make the best decisions we can, and then you look backwards and you're like, wow, that was a really good decision or a really bad decision, but frankly, you really didn't know how it was going to play out. There's no way to know ahead of time. You just try to make a good decision.
And then there's always the add-on of everybody else's opinion on what you should do.
Yeah, but that type of feedback, that what's hopefully a little bit more objective feedback, can be really insightful. I think. I mean, because we all have blind spots.
Right. So it can be very insightful if they're giving open, positive feedback. But then the flip side to that is the ones that have their own agendas.
Yeah, which you always got to be careful of. I guess for me, like the big thing that I struggle with on this one is you get this idea in your head, and we've all seen this, right? Where what was it, Thomas Edison? What's that saying? Where you're never as close to success as when you decide to walk away. I think, to paraphrase it.
It sounds like you're paraphrasing it.
Thanks.
It's a good paraphrase, though.
You're really helping me out, brother.
You're really solid
throwing
paraphrase.
me a life raft here, and I appreciate it. I got a life preserver he just tossed in the water for me. Can't you tell? He threw some chum in for the sharks too, but he threw a life preserver out there, so I'm floating for the sharks at least. Thanks, buddy.
Solid paraphrase.
Yeah, we're never as close to success as the day we call it quits. And that is a pretty well known saying out there, or a paraphrase of that saying. And it's kind of portrayed all the time. Hey, it's that extra little effort. It's that extra day. It's the this or the that, where you just stick with something. I mean, the lesson always feels like just stick with something, and you're going to achieve this wild success. And there's no need to ever pivot or change. But is that some bullshit or what?
Well, there is that other popular saying that I shall try to paraphrase myself, that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is a definition of
insanity.
You got it.
Yep, it's true. That one's attributed to Einstein, I believe, although I've heard falsely attributed. Yeah, it's
probably
there's something
Tesla.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Definitely wasn't Benjamin Franklin. It's for sure Tesla over Franklin. But yeah, man, there's a lot to be said about that, right? I mean, and I think we do get blasted with this messaging. Just stick with something. Just stick with something, and it's gonna work out, and it's gonna work out. And there's some real good truth in that, because we have to be like the most impatient people of all time nowadays. We have attention spans of like seconds. We want instant gratification all the time. Have you heard of the marshmallow test?
Tell me all about this marshmallow test.
Oh, the marshmallow test. It's how many marshmallows can you shove in your mouth at once? Now, that would be a fun test. That'll be on our YouTube channel. We'll do that on our YouTube channel. And then try to we're definitely doing that on our YouTube channel. We're going to do the marshmallow test on our YouTube channel. The marshmallow test was, they took a bunch of, I think, 5-year-olds, and they put a marshmallow in front of the 5-year-olds. This is really interesting. And they said, hey, you know what? If you want, you can have this big marshmallow right now. Or if you're just willing to wait a little bit of time, and it really wasn't long at all, I think maybe 10 or 20 minutes. If you just wait a little bit of time, we'll give you 2. Bro, can I tell you, 80% of kids, they grab that first marshmallow, they throw it right in their mouth, they're like, forget you, I'm getting my marshmallow. 80%.
One marshmallow now is better than an idea of 2 marshmallows later.
Yeah, exactly. So even though just a little bit of delayed gratification could be 2 marshmallows, 80% of kids go after that 1 marshmallow. And you know what the most interesting thing about this study, I think this is like Harvard or Yale did the study, and they kind of took a look at these people 20 years later, and the need for instant gratification does not change from being a kid. So a 5-year-old, whatever your personality is there, is your personality. You're going to be that same way as an adult. And most of us are like that. So it's really interesting. I mean, to me, that's really interesting. We have no patience now. And so that messaging, should we, be seeing something through more, is arguably some really important messaging that people need to hear. But to be exhaustive and all-inclusive it's a big effing problem in my mind.
I was told there's going to be marshmallows.
That's all he took out of the conversation is marshmallows. I've got marshmallows. We're doing a marshmallow YouTube channel. He's like, forget the podcast. Let's go film our YouTube channel. I'm ready.
I'm willing to wait my 20 minutes if I get 2.
So here's the thing. There are plenty of instances where, like, the idea where you gotta stop before you go too far, or it's better to walk away from something. I mean, there's plenty of instances and stories about that in history where it's, well, geez, you just took it one step too far. If only you had folded your cards earlier, right? We still see plenty of that, and sometimes it's as simple as people with gambling issues. It's, man, how much better would your life have been if you just not made that last bet, if you had just walked away, if you just cut your losses, or taken your winnings if you're lucky. But I don't feel like that's the messaging people get a lot anymore.
It's not on brand for most of society and the goals that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's not trendy. It's not trendy to quit or to pivot or to change. It's trendy to just keep on keeping on.
Well, I guess if I think about this as from a marketing standpoint, right? We want people to make quick reactions and not think about it too much because they want to sell a product to them. And I'm saying we in the general, not necessarily us and me and you. But sales, from an advertisement standpoint, they want to get you to make a quick response. Purchase, purchase, purchase. Don't think about it. Just respond. To the flip side of that is the people that want you to do that also talk about change. Buy this product and it will change your life. Buy this product and you'll lose 100 pounds. So it's a way of using both strategies in the same world. Did that blow your mind a little bit?
A little bit. I was thinking about some of the instances in my life where I had a pivot, and where did I choose to continue on for longer than I should have. And I think I'm very much guilty of that. I'm very much guilty of just putting my head down and continuing to repeat. Not because I think it's the definition of insanity, but because I truly believe that sometimes where we want to go takes a lot longer than we believe to get there. Right? We don't have a GPS. It's going to take you 2 hours and 10 minutes. Or more accurately, we got like those old GPSs from 20 years ago or 10 years ago where it didn't update for traffic. So, hey, it'll take you 2 hours to get there, but hey, you're about to hit rush hour, so good luck from here. It's very interesting to me, but it really is a very personal subject. So I'm kind of curious, and I'm thinking, when have I figured out it's time to walk away or time to make a change and a pivot? And I think there's two instances where it's been, really kind of strongly brought to my attention, where it kind of made it a little easier. One, having somebody like my spouse who turns around and says, no, it's time for a change. You're not getting out of it what you want, and you need to make a change. So that is, somebody that, she may have an agenda, but her agenda is typically aligned with mine, my family's. It's for what we believe is best for our family. And then the other instance, I think, which is a real kind of wake-up call, if this has happened to any of you, is being fired. Well, maybe it's time for a change because you don't have a freaking choice. You're fired. Get out of here. Make a change. So those have always been easy ones. But outside of those, those occasions, it really has been tough for me to know, do I hold them or do I fold them?
So the big part that I always find to be challenging with this is I'm a big proponent of science and evidence. We love evidence. We love science. To get answers or some sort of clue of how things are going to go, you run experiments. And you multiply run different versions of that experiment to see the different outcome variables. Now, when we talk about this, we can't do that same way. Because if you stop something, you no longer know what's going to happen if you continued it. If you pivot, you have the information now of the pivot. You don't have the information of what would have happened if you didn't pivot. So everything that we're working on that part is an assumption. We'll never really know what that outcome would have been if we would have stayed course or if we stayed course and should have pivoted, we would never know what would happen if we would have pivoted earlier or if we would have pivoted later. We don't know what those other outcomes are. So that makes it very challenging for someone who loves science so much, because you're never going to know. You're never really going to know what would have been better.
I love what you just said. For one big reason, for our listeners out there that have read Malcolm Gladwell, you're probably familiar with the 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours of practice or work within anything to become an expert. And I've got air quotes here because I'm not really a big believer in what Malcolm Gladwell said right there. I think you could do 10,000 hours of something and still be pretty shitty at it. Honestly, I've seen plenty of people prove that to me over the years. Plenty of people bad at what they do after 10,000 plus hours of doing it. So I'm not really a big believer, but there was an article that came out, and let's see, we're late 2020 now. We're in Q4, about to go into Q4 2020 here. So this is within the last year and a half. I read this article. It was talking about Facebook and all these online companies, and it was really talking about it's not 10,000 hours, it's 10,000 iterations. It's 10,000 experiments to see what works best. It's the science, it's the hypotheses, it's the testing, and it's the conclusion and the results from that. So I really believe that. That, to me, speaks much more strongly than 10,000 hours, because 10,000 hours might not make you an expert. It might not be the best way to do things, but 10,000 iterations, I'm guessing you're probably going to know after a while what works best. But you can't pivot 10,000 times in life, can you?
Well, an iteration doesn't have to be a major pivot. I know a lot of people talk about, and you probably heard this before, when they were creating something, they didn't do it on the first formula. It's not Heinz, or what was it, not Formula 401, it's not Formula 3. There's 400 formulas before they got to the one that was correct. Now, I don't know if that's actually how they did that one, but it makes sense.
I like to believe that's true.
But here's the thing. They didn't redo the formula each time totally different. They just made small changes each time until it started to work.
Yeah, they didn't go from making like a bathroom cleaner to tennis rackets.
Right.
They just adjusted their cleaning formula.
Right. They start changing some of the ingredients, some of the amounts, some of the ratios. But the idea of what they did stayed on task, which is something that I like to think about. It is, do you need to always make wholesale changes, or you just need to make small, moderate changes? Now, we don't think of that as a pivot a lot of times, because when we think of pivots, we think of it to be more of a hard angle away from something. But each formula version in there was a small pivot from the other one.
So it's interesting to me, and yeah, I mean, you can make a small pivot, and it can still be a pretty substantial change of course. So here's something phenomenal I just saw on the internet. This really kind of resonated with me. It was the number 1, and it had an exponent there of 365. So what's 1.00 to the 365th power? 1, right? 1 times anything, it doesn't matter how many times it is. 1 times 1, it doesn't matter how many times, is always 1. But 1.01 to the 365th power was 37.1. So you could do the same thing over and over and over and over again and always get the same result, but you just make one tiny pivot, one tiny change, and the compounding effect can take you in a whole new direction. So it doesn't have to be this super large pivot to make a pretty extraordinary change in your life longer term. Is that kind of what you're saying?
It makes sense to what, yes. So it goes a little bit with what I was saying. And when you say that, I think about habits, and I think about when we talk about creating new behaviors. It is challenging to try to create a whole new behavior from scratch without any kind of reference point. It's a lot easier to do it if we take something that we already know and make subtle changes to it. Those tend to stick better. Those tend to have better results. And
one of my big takeaways there, Doc, is, you can pivot, and it can even be a serious pivot. You can go from, hey, I'm an engineer, to I'm gonna be a creative writer. I'm gonna write fiction. That's a huge pivot, right? I mean, those seem like totally opposite fields, and yet my guess is there's a massive foundation in your engineering world and skills and experience that you're going to be able to carry with you over to the creative writing world. Whether that's just building the world, building the characters, having a process, whatever it happens to be, whatever you took from that science world, you're carrying a lot of that with you into your next role. So even these larger pivots, it might seem like a drastic change, but how much of what you've already learned and the foundation and the skill set and the experience is carrying over? I would argue a whole lot of it.
Well, we can give a little bit more familiar example. Maybe someone talking on this podcast, speaking right now, spent 20 years in the hospitality field, working business.
Right. Yeah.
Pivoted, went to grad school and got a doctoral degree in behavior science.
He's a big pivot.
So that was a big pivot in life. It was a big change. It was going from a full career to going back to school and sitting in classrooms with a lot of people younger than me. I won't say how much younger, but younger than me. Not a decade or anything, but maybe.
Don't tell us more, please.
But it was a big change. It was a big pivot. But one of the things I think made me most successful with that was that background, right? It was that history, is that real life experience. And there is such a connection between the hospitality world, business world, and the psychology world. What made me so good at both of them was my study of behaviors, which, led me to study behaviors even more in the psychology world because I was so good at it in the hospitality world. That was one of my strengths, of noticing customer needs, seeing what was going to happen, putting out the fires before they began. And that's all the same skills that I use today.
Hey, man, I got a question. I'm curious, and maybe our listeners are too. You were in the restaurant industry. You're doing this 20 odd years, and you make this big pivot, this big change. Was there like this epiphany, this moment, that this one thing that happened to you, like you see in the movies or something, where you're like, I need to make a change. This isn't for me anymore. Or how did you kind of know it was time? Or didn't you, and you just said, forget it, I'm doing this one way or the other?
There was always an interest, and I'd actually, when I left one job, I decided I was going to go back to school, because that was my goal. It was always it was always in the back of my mind something I wanted to do. But it didn't seem realistic, so I left a job, and then I got recruited for another place as a consultant, and I was just going to consult, and I wound up getting taken in fully to run the restaurant, and just found myself doing everything I didn't want to do at the last one, working 80 hours a week, way too many hours, way too much responsibility for someone else's business. So my decision was, it's either I'm going to go all in and open my own place and do it for myself, or I'm going to go back to school and get that degree in psychology that I always wanted. And I said, well, they'll both probably cost the same amount of money, so I might as well do one that I haven't done yet, because I could always go back to the other if I need to. And that was the decision. It was wanted to have my own control take over, and if I'm going to put that kind of effort into it, to be for me and not someone else.
Yeah, that's interesting. It sounds like the right boxes weren't being checked. And I don't mean to sound cliche about it, but it's, there are things where I don't want this. I don't want this. I don't want this. And it's not giving me what I want. And so maybe that's the best way to know when to pivot. Although I will say, if you're early in on something, there are going to be times where you're like, this is not what I want. This is not what I want. Well, of course not. You're building to what you want. You're not there yet. Mm-hmm. But if you love it, if you're passionate about it, if you believe it, then keep at it. So what was interesting about your story, Doc, is you didn't sit there and go, I love the restaurant industry. I want to run my own place, because I'm super passionate about this, you said, I don't want to do this for somebody else, and I don't think this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So now I'm going to make that change because I'm recognizing that.
Well, to add on to that, I think the part that I said partly at the end, it didn't get enough emphasis, was I know I could always go back to that. I'm never going to lose that skill. The passion's still there for the business. I still enjoy that business quite a bit. But there's a lot of things that go with it that aren't fun, right? But the idea that this was something else I can do, and there's nothing says 5-10 years from now that I don't go back and open a restaurant. It's always that possibility, and I think the idea that I was able to tell myself is that nothing's final. There's no finality in these kind of decisions. There's a chance to pivot and see if it's better, and if you find that it's not, you can go back to trying what you were doing in a different way before.
Wow. All the time in my other business, I talk to people about how the things we do aren't final. You're not making a choice that you cannot change down the road. Right? Life is very mutable. It changes on us, and we can change a lot in life. We don't have to just say we're walking away from something completely. Very few choices in life are kind of like irrevocable, I guess. Most of our choices in life, you can choose to unmake that choice, right? You're always going to deal with the time you invested into something and the consequences and repercussions of your decisions, good and bad, right? Those aren't necessarily bad words, but you want to go back to do something that you left, you can do that. You can revisit it, and that, I guess that's a really frustrating thing about life and the super cool thing about life, right? You don't know if you should be sticking with something. You don't know if you should be, making a larger pivot. But you also need to remember, well, gee, I can say maybe this isn't working and go back to it later.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing about that, right? And it's not majority of the time, nothing's always, but majority of the time, we'll take something from whatever decision we make. There might be some negatives that come with it, but there's always going to be some positives. Knowledge, experience, just that confirmation that was or was something that you didn't want to do. Sometimes not having that information is a much more negative for you. Always the what if. What if I would have tried this? What if I would have done something different? That's much more haunting than trying something, finding out you do or don't like it, succeeding or failing, because at least you get an answer. And getting an answer sometimes is much more valuable than indecision or unknown.
Sometimes that's all people need. You were talking there, and I was thinking to myself, well, geez, it's like that idea of you can't live in the past, you can't live in the future, you got to live in the now. You got to kind of live in the now, and whatever decisions you made, take the lessons you learned from them. And I know for most of us, this is maybe a pretty obvious thing, but the best lessons I've learned in life are from the failures. That moment where it's like, hey, you're fired. Guess what? I got some big takeaways from that. Good and bad takeaways from me, takeaways from the organization. And I think, because for me, that was one of my bigger pivots in my life was like, hey, you're fired. It's like, well, geez, that can be really impactful, but what's the good that you're taking from it? And it doesn't necessarily, for anybody who's been in that position, by the way, I'm going to speak to you specifically right now. If you're dealing with that, this is not necessarily a bad thing by any means to get fired. It just means that you and the organization or corporation weren't a good fit for each other at that time. It doesn't suggest anything about your value or who you are. It's just an event that happened. But I can tell you there's a reason I went into business for myself after something like that. And so to me, I look at that as a very good thing because it motivated me to finally say, I don't ever want somebody else to tell me what they think my value is or isn't. I'm going to own my value, and I'm never going to be put in that position because I don't want to be put in that position again. And so for me, that was a great motivating factor to really step into the world of entrepreneurship.
So what I like to call that more than anything, and if you've listened to us at all, you probably know this is one of my favorite words, evidence. Anytime that we can get some evidence, it helps our future decisions. And some of the evidence that you might have taken from that, JB, was that you might not have been a good fit for that company. It might have been something that you did that you would do better next time. There might be something that you look for in a company that would be different. But this is all knowledge you take from that. So it could be, like you said, a good or bad situation. But there's always something that you're going to take that's knowledge-based. And that knowledge base will help you make a better decision next time. So you might not, other people listening might not want to work for themselves. They might want to get another job for another company. But they might say, well, I know about things about that last company that I don't like. Or there's some things about that last company I do like. And when I look for the next one, I want to make sure that that fits the things that I need. And that's just evidence.
Evidence is always a powerful thing. We talk about mastery with science all the time. The science behind something, evidence drives that. And good and bad, that's just our interpretation of an event. Things are really neither good nor bad. It's just something that we experience and something that happens in our lives. And, how you interpret that and how you choose to allow that to influence you is going to determine if it's good or bad. For me, getting fired was a great thing. Took me time to accept and realize that, and to really look at it from an objective perspective. But the best thing in the world, getting fired allowed me to spend more time with my wife and my son than I had ever been able to in my life. I grew up in a world where my son was 3, and the year after I got fired, I saw my son more than I did in the first 3 years of his life. And to me, that's like the greatest thing in the world. I couldn't have asked for a better result. And so that interpretation of good or bad with events in life, whatever drives you to make a pivot, whether it's a small pivot or a large pivot, just be a little bit objective with how you look at things, because it's typically neither good nor bad. It's just how you interpret it.
Disclaimer for our listeners: if you would like to spend more time with your children right now, you do not have to actively go get fired today. There are other ways to do that. But if you choose to do that, that's still your choice. Feel free. Just that's not the only way to do it.
It's not the only strategy to get more time with your kids. That's true. You don't have to stop working to have more time with your children.
I just wanted to be clear, because I know some of our listeners would be like, well, JB told me if I want to spend time with my kids, I got to go quit, and then you might get them in trouble with their spouse.
No, I told them to go get their asses fired, not to quit. There's a difference. Get the severance. Get the severance, people. Yeah, this is interesting, Doc. I mean, the idea of a pivot, because there's millions of people dealing with this stuff right now, right? Millions of people are trying to figure out new ways to do things. Either large pivots or small pivots. The world is really in flux right now.
It's, I think something we hopefully pointed out on this was that a pivot doesn't have to be huge, but it can be. It can be a life-changing pivot, but it could also be a small pivot. And it's a important distinction to know that small changes make a big difference also. So not everyone out there, some of you might need to make some big pivots, but some of you are doing pretty well and just want to make a couple of small pivots to take you to that next level.
Yeah, what is it? The butterfly effect? I don't know, this Asimov or Heinlein or whatever, but the flap of the butterfly's wings, can completely change history. It's something really small over time can make a huge difference. So even small pivots can be considerable given time, because they're going to change your course. And a little change today can equal a big change further down the road.
Which is why we don't time travel.
Marty McFly taught us that lesson, huh?
Indeed.
Well, this has been it's been interesting, Doc. This is a good one. It was nice hearing a little bit about your personal pivot there with the relationship industry, making the transition. Maybe you'll be the first psychologist to also offer alcohol and bar food at your sessions, or is that like a pretty common thing nowadays? I don't know.
I'm wondering how I would get zoned for that. I'm sure there's licensing boards that would not be on the same table as us, but hey.
Yeah.
Something I could take a risk on, right?
You know what I'll add here, folks. We'd love to hear from you about your pivots, about the things you've changed in your life, about what's given you a sense for when to know when to hold them or when to fold them. Really kind of getting back to that theme. How you stick the course.
Walk away, know when to run.
Yeah, so run right to our Facebook community because we'd love to hear from you. And you can email us here at podcast@jbandthedoctor.com, but definitely check out our Facebook community. We'd love to see you there. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It's in the show notes. The link to get there is really easy to find. And I'm going to remind you, coming up on YouTube, we're going to do the Marshmallow Challenge, the fun one. We're going to put we're going to put a marshmallow in front of Doc and see how long he lasts. Now,
I want 2 of them.
Well, you got to wait the 20 minutes. We'll see if you can do it.
So how long does this 20 minutes multiply? So if I wait 40 minutes, do I get 3? Because that might be a really long YouTube video.
You know what? We'll do a time lapse, and I'm not going to tell you ahead of time. No, we're
6 days later.
Here, let's do this. Our listeners can tell us what they want us to say. We're going to shove our mouths full of marshmallows, and you guys come up with the phrase you want us to say. And we'll see who can win the competition.
I'm excited for that.
That's going to be a good one.
Also, if you check down in our show notes, we have a link to our upcoming webinar, free webinar.
Yes.
And as I was saying, this kind of put things together. This would be a great talk about a small pivot, right? This is some information on there that helps take you to that next level without having to make wholesale changes, taking some of the great things that you've done in the past and just giving a little bit of new science behind it to take you to that next level.
I love it. It's actually called Next Level Sales. The sales techniques you must know to level up your sales. And Doc, man, it's right on. Hit the nail on the head with the hammer with that one. It's
Continuity.
just a little small change, people. It's a little small pivot. It's a 1 degree difference from where you are today that can make a huge compounding effect over time. I absolutely love it. So don't just check out our Facebook group. Don't just check out our YouTube video. That is going to be a lot of fun. Come join us for our free webinar. You will not be disappointed. And maybe that small little pivot there can make a huge difference on your life.
Huge.
All right. Doc, I think I'm good on my end here. You good?
I'm good. Follow us on all social media, in case we didn't say that. Subscribe, like, share.
All that good stuff.
Push a button.
All right. I'm JB.
I'm the doctor.
And we'll sell you later.
Peace out, yo.